Today, we will cover a global illumination technique for an easy and realistic lighting setup. The goal is to use a minimum number of real-time lights and rely on screen space global illumination SEGI instead. Let's begin by setting up the sun. Configure the sun as a directional light with soft shadows, and make sure to enable the sun source checkbox. Next, set the layers to char and map. Since we will be using global illumination, it is advisable to set the environment intensity to a minimum value. However, you can set the exposure to a higher value while keeping the overall brightness low. Now let's enable SEGI. For the initial setup, I recommend turning on the debug mode and setting it to GI. To start, set the skylight. Typically, it is advised to use a gray or bluish color for the skylight, although the specific choice may vary depending on the scene. Furthermore, ensure that the sky intensity is set to a relatively low value. After configuring the skylight, the next step is to set up the sunlight. Start by selecting the sun source, which represents the direction of the sunlight. Then, adjust the soft sunlight slider to control the level of light scattering. Remember to keep it subtle and avoid excessive adjustments. Now, let's add shadows to the scene. You can achieve this by adjusting the occlusion strength and occlusion power settings for general shadow adjustments. Furthermore, you have the flexibility to fine-tune separate occlusion levels based on distance. However, it is important to be cautious when modifying the near occlusion strength parameter, as it often leads to unsightly artifacts and excessive shading. It is generally advisable to keep this parameter at a lower value to avoid such issues. Now it's time to simulate bounce lighting by adjusting the GI gain levels. Increasing the GI gain levels enhances the bounce lighting effect, making the scene appear brighter and more natural. Now we have perfectly lit scene with only one directional light. Once you have achieved the desired lighting for your scene, you can optimize performance and save memory RAM by disabling the Update GI checkbox. However, keep in mind that disabling the Update GI checkbox means that any changes made to the lighting or objects in the scene will not be reflected in the global illumination until the checkbox is enabled again. So, if you plan to make further adjustments to the lighting or objects, you'll need to re-enable the Update GI checkbox. Now let's take a look at character lighting. Unfortunately, global illumination can only work with deferred shaders, and not all character shaders support it. Therefore, we have to light the character separately. First, ensure that all your clothing materials are using the Hammond/Close True Cutoff shader. For accessories, make sure to use the Hammond/Item Cutoff shader. To simulate the environment light for character lighting, we will be using a cam light with disabled shadows and lower intensity. Make sure to set the cam light to its default position and disable the map layer. Next, add a directional light with the same position and color as the sunlight. Ensure that you disable the map layer for this light as well. But for this light, keep the shadow strength at maximum. That's it, now we have achieved a nice scene lighting setup along with the character. With the new version of the graphics plugin, you can save global illumination settings in a scene file. This will allow you to easily share your awesome scene with other people, ensuring they experience the same lighting as you have set up.